Welcome grade 7 students. How are you? Are you great? Good. So please go to www.cathomeschool.com. Then go to curriculum, enter the password. Okay, then click for humanities because that will be our lesson for today. The humanities. Okay, so before I start the lesson, can I ask you students what is the most beautiful places you've been to? Alright, can you please rank them? Are you done? Great. So why am I asking you this type of question? Because I'll introduce to you the 7 wonders of the ancient world. So what are the 7 wonders of the ancient world? First are the Great Pyramid of Giza, Hanging Gardens of Babylon, Statue of Zeus at Olympia, Temple of Artemis at Ephesus, Mausoleum at Halicarnus, Colossus of Rhodes, Lighthouse of Alexandria. So these are the 7 wonders of ancient world. Let's start of the Pyramid of Giza in Egypt. So the Great Pyramid of Giza was built as a tomb for the Egyptian pharaoh Khufu in 2560 BC. The 481-foot monument was built over a 20-year period with 2 million blocks of stone, each weighing an average of more than 2 tons. For nearly 4 millennia, it remained the tallest building in the world. It lost the title only in the Middle Age when the English Lincoln Cathedral surpassed it. So, this is the Great Pyramid of Giza. The interior has 3 chambers, the king chambers, the queen chamber, and the unfinished lowest chamber, and ascending and descending passages. What we see today isn't quite the wonder the ancient world would have beheld. On the day it was unfinished, the pyramid surface would have been smooth and pale, but time has worn away the limestone casing, fragments of which can still be seen towards the great structure base. The original Great Pyramid was also 20 feet taller than it is today. We're missing its pyramidion, the sacred capstone that would have crowned the tomb. The Great Pyramid of Giza is also a wonder in the literal sense. The mystery of how it was built has puzzled historians and archaeologists for millennia. The stones come from distant quarries, some as far as 500 miles away, and the pyramid itself was built with astonishing precision. The structure's measurements are as accurate as 21st century architect with modern tools could achieve. And yet, the ancient Egyptians didn't have wheels, pulleys, or even iron tools. So how did they manage to transport, lift, and shape the stones? Like thousands before them, today archaeologists continue to hope they will unearth the answer. So I have this video about the Great Pyramid mystery solved.
So years before, Jean-Pierre approached the mystery of the Great Pyramid with an architect's eye. Working from the most detailed architectural plans ever drawn of the Great Pyramid, slowly his theory began to evolve. As the years passed, unnoticed by Egyptologists, he came to know the minute details of the pyramid like no one else on Earth. The $64,000 question is, how do you raise blocks all the way to the top of a 480-foot pyramid? We saw that there were real problems with either a single ramp or a spiral ramp. And lifting cranes certainly don't do the job. So how do you do it? That's the problem Jean-Pierre has been tackling for all these years. His solution still has a ramp, but it's inside the pyramid. And incredibly, according to Jean-Pierre, it's been hidden there for 4,500 years. He calculated that the slope of this ramp had to be about 7% so the men could haul the blocks up it. He also figured the ramp would have to start at the base of the pyramid and go upwards as the pyramid grew. It's not as easy as it sounds. Remember, the pyramid is not solid. Inside the Great Pyramid are 3 large chambers. The lowest one is called the Queen's Chamber. Above it is a mysterious room called the Grand Gallery. And on top of all that is the King's Burial Chamber. All 3 chambers are connected by passageways. Is it possible to have a ramp snaking up through the pyramid that doesn't run into one of these chambers or passageways? As he began building his computer model, he could see the ramp just 10 feet inside the smooth outer surface of the pyramid, turning level after level all the way to the top of the pyramid. Kind of like a ramp in a parking garage. Amazingly, Jean-Pierre's ramp never hit any of the chambers or passageways inside the Great Pyramid. For the first time in history, a structural 3D model of the Great Pyramid had been built to test a theory. Jean-Pierre knew the internal ramp was a real possibility. But he still had problems to solve. How to turn the blocks around the corners of the ramp. You see, the men hauling the blocks need a place to stand in front of the blocks. When they reach the end of the straightaway on the ramp, where can they stand to pull the block? Jean-Pierre's solution is to leave the corners open. At the end of each length of the ramp, a notch, about 30 feet square, would have been left open. This notch let in light and fresh air, but it had an even more important function. Stationed at each corner was a crane that would lift and position the block so it could travel up the next flight of the ramp. These cranes could be the machines that Herodotus was talking about. But like any good detective story, we've been saving the best for last. If Jean-Pierre is right about the internal ramp, the French team should have detected it in their 1980s high-tech survey. In the French team's published report, there is no diagram of an internal ramp. It looks like Jean-Pierre is wrong. Surely a study this sophisticated would have found evidence of something as large as an internal ramp. But 15 years after the study, Jean-Pierre was asked to meet a member of the French team who said he had some very good news for him. Dr. Bouy had heard about Jean-Pierre's theory and wanted to show him something. A diagram that the French didn't fully understand, so they never published it. Wow. C'est incroyable. This computer printout shows a low-density spiral shape inside the Great Pyramid. It's amazingly close to Jean-Pierre's drawing of the internal ramp. So years before Jean-Pierre's theory, the French may have found evidence of an internal ramp inside the Great Pyramid.
So, we go now to the Hanging Gardens of Babylon in Iraq. Okay. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon are the stuff of legends, and sadly have to stay there because nobody has ever found them. Babylon was an ancient city-state located south of modern-day Baghdad. Archaeologists have scoured the area, but no search has ever turned up the remains of the massive tired planting beds. What's more, no one has ever actually found the gardens mentioned in any existing Babylonian text. The only description of them come from the Greek who cataloged the 7 wonders of the ancient world. So, here's the painter Ferdinand Kabb's in 1886 depiction of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Some take this as a confirmation that the gardens never existed at all. They were always just a beautiful myth. Others think that the Greek writers were confused. They were thinking of an Assyrian garden near current-day Mosul and got the location mixed up. But Manly believed the Hanging Gardens were real and have simply been lost to time, destroyed by earthquakes, or perhaps buried under the waters of the Euphrates River, which changed its course over the century to engulf an area that has long been a candidate for the garden's location. So I have this video here about the Gardens of Babylon.
One of the seven wonders of the ancient world, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, said to be an architectural and engineering feat. The gardens are the stuff of legend, but did they ever exist? Hello and welcome back to Life's Biggest Questions, the channel that looks to delve into a breadth of topics, be they science, politics, health, history, myth or legend. I'm your host Rebecca Felgate, and today we're asking, were the Hanging Gardens of Babylon real? Before we get started, I want to ask you guys to leave a thumbs up on our videos if you like our channel. Of course, please do click on that big beautiful notification bell. So the Hanging Gardens of Babylon were said to be a beautiful oasis, a tranquil haven built by King Nebuchadnezzar. He built them for his wife Amethyst. Construction was thought to have been at some point during his reign between 605 and 561 BCE. Babylon itself was a thriving city in Iraq that these days has been badly damaged by war. In ancient writings, the gardens were first described by Babylonian historian Berosus. This was in a 280 BCE book called Babylonica. This unfortunately was lost, but later summarized in a different text. Following that, the gardens have later been alluded to by the ancient Greeks and Romans, who give detailed descriptions as to their layout. The gardens are described as raised quadrangular platforms with arched vaults and built on stone columns. Said to be 75 feet high, the gardens were more like a series of lush balconies, kept green by elaborate irrigation systems. If the gardens were real, it's estimated that it would take 8,200 gallons of water each day to keep the plants and grass sufficiently watered. This would obviously have required huge effort on the part of the Babylonians, which cast some doubt on whether or not they actually existed. But as we know, kings and queens in these eras were pretty ostentatious. The seven wonders of the ancient world are considered to be the pyramids of Giza, the temples of Artemis, the statue of Zeus at Olympia, the mausoleum at Halicarnassus, the Colossus of Rhodes, the Pharaoh's lighthouse at Alexandria, and the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. While the pyramids are the only wonder to remain intact, the thing that all of the wonders except the gardens share is reliable first-hand accounts and an established location. All references in history that we have, so that which weren't destroyed, all discuss the gardens from a second-hand perspective, from hearsay. Clay tablets detailing life in Babylon exist from the time period that the gardens were supposed to exist, but none of them reference the gardens at all. No structure unearthed in archaeological excavations has ever been proven to be the ancient wonder. This has led many to refer to the wonder as the lost gardens of Babylon, and for many others to simply assume that they didn't exist. That being said, there are a lot of structures that have been lost over the course of time that archaeologists are still looking for. One huge example is Cleopatra's tomb. Many historians simply think that the structure was lost in one of the many wars ravaged over the area throughout history. While no structure has been confirmed to be the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, many archaeologists have claimed to have found the missing wonder. Between 1899 and 1917, German archaeologist Robert Coldway unearthed 14 large stone rooms with arched ceilings in the southern citadel of Babylon. He claims these must have been the ruins of the gardens, but some historians think that the location is far too far away from the river. They thought the water from the river was instrumental in the garden's irrigation. It was concluded that the structure was likely a series of storage rooms. A more recent excavation in Nineveh, 300 miles north of Iraq, seems somewhat fruitful. In 2013, Oxford historian Dr. Stephanie Daly claims that the gardens were actually near the river Tigris in Nineveh. Excavations found aqueducts in line with what could have been expected from the gardens of Babylon. Dr. Daly also claims that when King Assyria ransacked Babylon in 689 AD, the Assyrian capital of Nineveh was dubbed New Babylon. This may be where and why the confusion came from. As with all legends passed down through history, time has eroded source credibility, and all we have to really go on is what we find in the earth. Sadly, as time changes fables, it also erodes physical evidence. If a lot of people mentioned the gardens, there is probably some truth in their existence, but without a first-hand account of physical evidence in the earth, we just can't say for sure. So, were the Hanging Gardens of Babylon real? Probably. Were they in Babylon? Well, maybe not. We just can't know for sure. But don't take our word for it. Let me know what you guys think. Let me know whether you think the Hanging Gardens of Babylon are real in the comment section down below. Also, if you like our videos, please do make sure you leave a hearty thumbs up and stay subscribed for more big answers. Also, if you want a specific question answered, why don't you leave us a comment letting us know. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Okay. The story goes that the Hanging Gardens were commissioned in 600 BCE by the king Nebuchadnezzar II as a gift to his wife Amethyst of Media, who missed the rolling greens hills of her homeland. The Babylonian architect of legend outdid themselves. They created a series of rising terraces, one at the top of the other, covered in an astonishing variety of trees, shrubs, and flowering plants. So, here's the picture from Robert von Spallart in 1804, the depiction of the garden's rising terrace. It was an oasis in the desert, irrigated by a complex mechanism that drew water from the nearby Euphrates. The Iodorus of Sicily described brick walls 22 feet thick and planting beds deep enough to the large mountain trees to take root. Quintus Curtillus Rufus, a Roman writer, adds that it was constructed high above the surrounding land, on top of a beautiful citadel, making it not only the site of astonishing views but also a remarkable feat of engineering. The third 7 wonders of the ancient world are the statue of Zeus at Olympia, Greece. So here is the picture. Can you see it? Okay. The statue of Zeus, one of the most remarkable of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, might have been born out of pretty rivalry, but its astonishing size and beauty have eclipsed everything else in the historical record. The sculpture was originally commissioned by the Greek city-state of Elis, famous for holding the ancient Olympics in an effort to outdo rival polis Athens, who had just finished construction on a massive statue of Athena for the Parthenon. Not to be outdone, the Elean council snatched up the sculptor, a man named Phidias, as soon as his labors in Athens were finished, and commissioned him to depict the king of all gods in his seat at the great temple in Olympia. So I have this video here. So this video explores the context in which Phidias was commissioned to build the great statue of at Olympia and the scandal that dogs in his footsteps. So let's all watch this.
Although all 7 wonders lay inside the Greek Empire, only one stood within mainland Greece. In the 5th century BC, Greece was invaded by Persian armies. By 480 BC, the Persians had taken Athens, destroying much of the city. But the Greeks fought back and defeated the Persians. Within 10 years, the statesman Pericles came to power. Athens was rich from the spoils of war. Pericles commissioned monuments glorifying its victory, including a new temple to the goddess Athena, the Parthenon. It was decorated with lavish friezes. The most famous are known today as the Elgin marbles. The finest Greek sculptors worked on the Parthenon. Pericles was so impressed with one in particular, named Phidias, that he made him the chief designer. Phidias would become the Michelangelo of the Greek age. Phidias was asked to make a statue of the goddess Athena to stand inside the Parthenon. Crafted from ivory and gold, he designed it to stand 40 feet high. Statues and monuments were being commissioned across the country, and artistic rivalry was intense. Phidias was determined that his Athena would outshine every other statue in Greece.
Phidias' great achievement was to meet this challenge after he made Athena. Virtually every other Greek town wanted such a statue.
Phidias was heralded as a genius, but his name became blackened by scandal. On completing the Athena, he was unable to account for all the gold he had used. Phidias was accused of embezzlement by those eager to bring down his powerful patron. Fortunately for Phidias, news of his spectacular Athena had traveled to Olympia. He was now commissioned to make a statue of Zeus to stand inside the temple there. So, 438 BC, to escape the scandal in Athens, Phidias left for Olympia. The site of the Olympic Games was dominated by a temple. It awaited Phidias' masterpiece. The Olympic Games attracted competitors from all over the Greek world. Wars stopped when the games were held in honor of Zeus, the supreme god. Phidias arrived in Olympia to take up his new commission. With his reputation on the line, he approached the great temple.
So it seems that the Eleans, having seen or heard about what was up in Athens, decided, we want one of those too, and we want Phidias to make it for us. And they went and they commissioned him to do that.
Until Phidias, ivory carving had only been executed on a small scale. Phidias designed the Zeus to be taller than a 4-story building. It would fill one end of the temple. It was too large to be carved out of solid blocks of ivory. So he developed a technique which has never been surpassed.
The structure of ivory is such that you can unscroll it. You have to imagine it as if you're unpeeling an onion or putting a pencil in an old manual pencil sharpener and turning it, and you get a thin, narrow shaving strip of ivory. And no one had tried to do this before, and that's really what was original.
Phidias developed a secret method for softening the ivory. Only a few ancient recipes survive. Professor Kenneth Lapatin is the first to have rediscovered them.
Some seem to be a bit fantastic, like wrapping them in fish skin, which I have never tried to do. Others say boil 3 days with mandrake root, which seemed a bit dangerous to try. Others said soak in oil, which did nothing for me. But one said soak in vinegar, which I did do, and that produced results. And what happens is that the ivory, which is tooth, it's largely calcium, has some of its chemical components leached out of it, and it becomes soft and flexible. And then you can mold it to shape and dry it out, and it will maintain that shape. And it was Phidias' genius that assembled these techniques from various different crafts to make this wonder of the world.
Phidias and his assistants painstakingly followed this technique of shaping every detail. Every ivory section is made to fit exactly. Zeus began as a wooden framework. To this, the molded ivory sections were fastened. The statue was built up, piece by piece, to a height of 45 feet. It took over 7 years before Phidias was satisfied everything was perfect. The Zeus was then assembled inside the temple.
It had a great reputation, but none of that really prepared you for that shock when you walked through the temple doors and saw the image. unlike, I think, all of the other wonders, you couldn't see it from afar. You had to go and enter the temple, and then it hit you all at once. Oh, gee, that really is big. Wow.
The writer Strabo, in the 1st century AD, was critical of its revolutionary composition.
The sculptor may be criticized for not having appreciated the correct proportions. He has shown Zeus seated, so we have the impression that if Zeus moved to stand up, he would unroof the temple.
The Zeus sits still. He's holding his emblems of power, the victory in his right hand, the scepter in his left. But he's not doing anything. The stilling of the god gives him greater power because there is the potential there for action. He's very aware, and it's that calmness that becomes a hallmark of the classical style.
Characteristics of Phidias's world wonder are echoed throughout Western art. From Byzantine images of Christ to 20th century statues of American presidents. In 1914, Daniel Chester French began work on the Lincoln Memorial statue. Using the same composition as the Zeus, Daniel French made the Lincoln statue out of 28 pieces of marble. Phidias had been meticulous in his study of light, but Daniel French discovered on a dull day his sculpture looked flat. He had to install an elaborate lighting setup. The scale of his sculpture was also criticized, this time for being too small. Daniel French had to double its dimensions to satisfy his commissioners. Even then, the Lincoln statue was only half the height of Phidias's Zeus. Over 450 years after Phidias's world wonder was made, Roman soldiers and workmen arrived with special orders from the Emperor Caligula. He had instructed them to bring the statue back to Rome, so he could put his own head on it. Legend recalls the statue let out such a loud cackle of laughter. The scaffolding collapsed and the workmen fled. Luckily for them, the ruthless emperor was assassinated before they returned to Rome, empty-handed. By 391 AD, the Christian church banned pagan cults and closed the temples. The Olympic Games ceased, and the great sanctuary of Olympia fell into disrepair. When the Zeus was 800 years old, it was bought out by Luasis, an imperial chamberlain from Constantinople, and installed in his palace art collection there. Phidias's world wonder would not survive for long. The fire destroyed the palace and the collection, cremating the finest statue of all time. The influence of Greek art and architecture spread into Persia, an enemy of Greece. At the western tip of the Persian Empire lay the once great...
All right. The next is the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus, Turkey. So, here is the picture of the Temple of Artemis. Alright. The Temple of Artemis at Ephesus was one of the unluckiest buildings of the ancient world. It was destroyed on at least 4 separate occasions, but each time it was rebuilt more beautiful than the last iteration, until Antipater of Sidon, one of the Greek chronicles of the 7 wonders of the world, said it blew all the others away. The original temple dates back to the Bronze Age. The people of Ephesus built it had originally been built by the Amazons, the fierce huntress of the Greek legend. The temple was destroyed in 17th century BCE in flood, a danger that site was especially vulnerable to. But that didn't stop Ephesians of the 6th century from rebuilding it in the exact same location. Croesus, the rich Latin king, was famously misunderstood the oracle prediction that his war was going to destroy a great empire reportedly funded the new temple's construction. So here is it, the picture of the temple. Sadly, like many of Croesus' efforts, the reconstruction ultimately proved futile. This temple too was destroyed, this time in 356 BCE by a man called Herostratus, who was hoping to go down in the annals of history as a famous arsonist. The temple was rebuilt again 30 years later, and this time the Ephesians were determined to make it last. No expense was spared, and it was built larger than either of its predecessors.